Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And today we have a special guest, friend of the show, and a fellow iHearter, Anna Hossnieh. Yay!
Yay! Yay!
Thank you for that. Can you introduce yourself for our listeners? Or reintroduce, I guess.
Yes. Hi. I'm Anna Hossnieh. I'm a managing executive producer here at iHeartRadio and co-host of the Ethnically Ambiguous podcast and producer of a bunch of podcasts I'm sure you've heard, like Daily Zeitgeist, Las Culturistas, This Is Important, you know, the whole iHeart comedy side. That's me.
Indeed. And yes, we were talking about the fact that you were previously on before me, pre me.
Pre you, yeah.
Having a best conversation without me. I'm very sad I wasn't a part of that. I just want that to be known.
Yeah, yeah.
It is known. It is noted, known.
Thank you.
But now we can have another conversation, a whole new conversation.
So, yeah, we're fixing this. And, we've been talking about having you on the show for a while because you do have this vast amount of experience and titles under your professional belt. And we know you are someone who has been in the front of and behind the scenes of podcasting and all about it, and are so excited to get your perspective on this very fast-changing and fast-paced industry. So thank you for coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me again. Anney, not Samantha. I'm just joking. It's funny. I literally feel like we've podcasted together. Like, I feel like I've been on this show with you because we've, actually have podcasted together before in other shows and stuff. But I guess you weren't there that first time. In my mind, you were. That's what's weird. It's like, okay.
See, that's how I like it. Like, I've never, I was always here. That's the way I want it to be for all of our listeners as well as guests, that I've always been here even when I wasn't.
Samantha has always been here.
Like, I'm the ghost.
Yes.
You are kind of a ghost because you're in like a dark background. Your head's in light.
It's just floating. I know. I'm so close to the camera too. I was like, I can't adjust my head and my mic, so I'm right up on the screen. But and as in fact, I was just thinking about the fact my first experience with speaking as a podcaster was with you and Shireen and Anney in Florida. And that was such a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Remember? Yeah, we were on that whole panel. So this is kind of how I got to know the podcasting industry. Honestly, you and many of the folks of California, the comedy, I guess, segments, are the first people that I actually met, even before some of my Atlanta people, which I live in Atlanta, which I still think is funny.
That's right. We really took Orlando by storm during podcast movement there.
Sure did.
Never forget the Hilton Lazy River.
Oh, I can't. I try to.
My favorite place.
Yeah, so I think you had a good experience as opposed to Anney and I getting stuck and having a war story coming out of it, going we're never doing that again, ever.
Yeah.
Really?
Ever.
I laughed at that Lazy River.
Employees laughed in our face.
Yeah, they had to teach us how to, they're like, you okay? Do you need help? Literally, as they're trying to clean up around us. We're like, we're stuck. We're sorry.
Wow.
That's a whole other show, though. But yes, you are one of the first faces with Anney, as well as our own producers of podcasting for me, because it was such a new thing. Again, it had been around, but it really started catching on fire. I was like, whoa, people have jobs, careers out of this. I say this to Anney, who's been a part of it for 10 years, but still, in my mind, it's so new. But I was really blown away with the things that happen within podcasting and what kind of field it is, and how there's so many layers within podcasting that it's a big industry, but it seems so small to me, because you often think of the indie podcasts that have the host that edit themselves and they try to publish it on their own. But when you look at the bigger picture about how much money is being made. And so I wanted to get into that with you, kind of talking about the industry and what you've seen and how you think it needs to change, or what are the good things in it. But before we start there, how did you get into podcasting?
I got into podcasting in 2013, 2014, around then, because I was working in live comedy producing. I was producing a lot of live shows for stand-up and variety and improv around Los Angeles. And I met comedian Dave Huntsberger, who is the best. Shout out Dave. David, you guys might know him as David Huntsberger. I call him Dave, no big deal. No, I'm just joking. But he asked me, he's like, wow, you seem really interested in like working in comedy. Like, are you interested in podcasting? And I was like, yes. I took a bunch of like audio courses in college. So I'm just really into like editing and working like with software. And, you know, I've done that my whole life. And he was like, do you want to intern on a podcast I have at Earwolf called Professor Blastoff, which was hosted by him, Tig Notaro, and Kyle Dunnigan. And I said yes. So that was like my first foray into podcasting. I started interning for their show at Earwolf, which was a fun experience, really cool. I got to sit in on recordings with like so many cool people, like Molly Ringwald from like 16 Candles, and like, you know, a bunch of like really cool people like that, like Diablo Cody. Like I was like, whoa, like this is cool. And I also really liked Professor Blastoff because it was just a fun show. And so that was like my first step into podcasting, kind of like watching how it gets made, kind of seeing the background of it a little. And then from there, like as I gained more experience, I started producing other comedians' podcasts, basically. And then I just like kind of went from there, really.
Took off.
I know. Now look at me.
But you started huge with Earwolf, because I remember like one of the first podcasts I knew of outside of How Stuff Works, like Stuff You Should Know, was Comedy Bang Bang, which was signed onto Earwolf at that point in time. That's huge. That's a pretty big network because Earwolf is kind of like along the lines of one of the first podcasting networks.
Early comedy. I mean, that was Comedy Bang Bang was one of the first podcasts I knew about as well. And I would listen to it. And then it was like cool to be in the Earwolf offices and like see like Scott Aukerman walk by and he'd be like, whoa. And now I podcast with him. He guests on my shows. It's been like full circle. It's very surreal times where you're like, wow.
Just so cool.
I'm exhausted. What can I say? I'm exhausted.
Oh, gosh.
No, I don't blame you.
Yeah.
That is fair. But so you've seen this industry from when it was kind of like, you know, burgeoning into what it is now, which is, I have a game with Samantha where I'm like, oh, I love critiquing podcasts and like movies and TV because I so rarely get to do that. Like all my friends get to do that. But I'm like, podcasting is now like a joke in TV.
I know. And it's hilarious. The ones who do it well do it real well, you know? And you're like, yes, you get it.
Yes. We're curious if you want to talk about how you've seen it change. Like we recently did an episode on, you know, there's still some real issues with diversity in podcasting and how it's still like a lot of white men largely doing podcasting. Is that something that you have seen change? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I felt like for me, it was when it like kind of blew up, and I guess like I felt like it was a lot of the same stuff that we were hearing. Like it was a lot of true crime. I mean, obviously Sarah Koenig's Serial like popped off the like true crime sort of spree, if you will, pun intended, of like, you know, like that sort of genre of podcasting. So all of a sudden, like everyone's like, oh, we should be investigating. We should be investigating crimes. In my opinion, I have a bit of like a sort of ethics issue with that of like, it's one thing to be like investigating like a decades old crime, like what happened with Adnan Syed, which is now like once again relevant in the news because Adnan just got out. But I feel like it almost went too far where all of a sudden people were like, this crime's happening in real time and we're going to solve it. And you're like, whoa, you're a podcaster. You know, you have to be like, let's just, you know, step on the brakes. So like that went from like 0 to 100. So I have kind of my own feelings about that. I feel like, you know, there really should be a line when it comes to podcasting, and there's a certain network that should tone it down. But then, we saw a lot of very similar ideas because people would see one idea and be like, that's a hit. Let's all try and recreate that idea, whether it be like a news podcast or it be like a politics podcast or even just like very sort of like inane things of like what my daily routine is or something like that. These sort of like ideas I felt like kept bubbling up and people were always just trying to do them better than the last person. And so it became a lot of podcasts that were basically the same podcast competing to be number one, right? Whether that be in comedy, news, science, like money, like so many like investing podcasts came up. And you were right. Like a lot of these were hosted by white people. And for me, I was kind of like, okay, like we get it, like it's a lot, but we get it. Which is like why I wanted to start my podcast, Ethnically Ambiguous, because I was like, I feel like nobody really wants to talk about the Middle East, which is sad because it exists and people always just like look down on it in a way of like, oh, it's so sad. They just want to kill each other out there. It's just always war. They're just, like we tried to help them when we invaded Afghanistan. We tried to help them, but you know what? They don't even know what they need, and the Middle East has been like strife with like American, diabolical interference, if you will, like for years, for as far back as we can remember. And we're watching it happen. Like we literally just watched what went down in Afghanistan when we tried to leave and the Taliban took over and like people are begging to be taken out of there. And we're like, oh my God, that's so tough. Anyway, gotta go. Aren't you happy we're leaving? And it's like, you created this mess, So we've watched that for years, generations of, just unnecessary interference by the U.S. And I just felt like no one really wanted to talk about it, especially after 9/11, because we'd already become, the Middle East had become this demonized figure. So like, that's one of the reasons I want to start my podcast, Ethnically Ambiguous, with my co-host, Shireen Yunus, because I was like, I don't feel like there's any like Middle Easterners taking the time. I mean, now there is, but like when we first started our podcast in 2017, I didn't feel like people were really talking about it. I felt like it was always just like white men reporting the news. And there was always like a very clear viewpoint of like, it is what it is over there. And it's sad and it's tough and people are dying. And well, we tried to help them. And that was like a very clear stance I was constantly hearing. And I was like, well, that's actually not what it is.
Right.
This has been a land that's been strife with literal just nonsense by every other country around it. No one really cares about these people. They just want to like, in a way, tame them, as truly horrible as that is. There was they just saw us truly, like many other countries that they've colonized, as savages. Like they were like, they don't know what they need. So I was like, we just need more perspectives from the people who are from these places or people who've lived these lives, who've had these experiences. And like, you weren't really seeing that in podcasting because people were like, and as time has gone on and, we've really started to lean into accepting people. And it's been a process in this country, especially like with people acknowledging like, yes, innocent Black men are being killed by the police. Okay. One step. Okay. I'm starting to see it now, which is like, everything in this country takes years for people to accept, Americans are we're so hard on our own way of like, no, America's the land of the free. Nothing bad would happen here. You come here for opportunity. And it's like, yeah, you come here for opportunity and like white supremacy and like racist ideals. It's not just opportunity. You have to like form to a type of way of life. You have to give in to white supremacy to gain any sort of like respect or like, to get anywhere in this country, because that's what the norm is. That's the status quo, is like, be as white as you can and people will respect you.
Exactly.
But I digress, it's a lot. So like, I was always like, we need more. Like, it's not just like white guys talking about money, true crime, or science, or the news. This world is so much more than that. And there's so much more going on. that like I've always felt like we just needed more. And as podcasting has grown, we're finally starting to get there.
Yeah.
Like Joe Rogan isn't number one as much anymore, you know?
As much. Yeah. So he got knocked off a couple of times.
He still kind of is, but like sometimes he gets knocked out a little.
It took royalty to get to that, but hey.
Yeah.
We'll put that in quotes. But yeah, no, that's absolutely that big conversation is when we're looking at podcasting and what it is and how it's growing bigger and bigger and bigger and becoming a moneymaker and a huge moneymaker at that. Who actually owns this content? Who actually is profiting off this content, who actually is being seen and noticed. And it's typically white men, white cis men, and this is who has been gaining the bigger ground. And the conversation beyond that is that it's very Western-centric in that it's just one type of point of view, and it's just spreading into like, this is the norm, kind of why we see, yes, being white is Korea and China, because they have that really in their mind. This is the supremacist ideals. We want to be there, so therefore we all want to be very literally white because this is that standard of rich and being on the hierarchy of things, and then trying to realize, oh, this is like the Western idea that's been really pushed out there because of colonialization, all of those conversations that we've had. And yeah, when it comes to the Middle East, we constantly have to talk about it. It's either in this perspective of, they're war-torn and they're just destroying themselves, or, oh, we got to go rescue them because they are heathens, because they don't believe what we believe, or some of those things, when we know actually the underlying reason is because they will have money there, as in like resources that the U.S. wants, and have taken false reasoning to quote unquote protect the people there. But that's a whole different conversation in itself, and took me a long time to figure that out for myself growing up in a very white household, which we all talked about. But beyond that, we see that, again, this is one of those moments where we have a moment in this industry. It's fairly still new, so that we can make a big change. And I say we, as in marginalized people, can actually make a big change and be a part of that change as well. Recently, we did a Monday Mini where statistics came out for those who are actually creators, with the fact that it's 51% white creators, only 14% are African American, only 24% are Latinx, and only 5% are Asians, and then 6% we don't know. They don't say their ethnicity. So that is such a big difference in numbers. And then we talk about women and men and those non-binaries. Any of those numbers are all, guess what, pretty much baking on the cisgender ideals and very binary in itself. Why do we need voices like your podcast and hopefully more podcasts where marginalized people are able to tell their stories? Why do you think that's important?
I think just like learning any perspective that's not yours is huge, because like the more you understand how other people have to live and what they go through, it creates more empathy within you. And I think that's like really what we lack in America, because it's so much of like a get ahead sort of mentality, like be number one, be successful, that we don't care about who we step on or, like push aside to get there. And I think that really stems from a lack of empathy and this like obsession with capitalism. Like we cannot stop. We feel like, oh, if you don't work hard, then you're going to be the person who's starving. And no one stops to be like, okay, but like, what about the people who are actually starving and don't have the opportunities and don't have the privilege to get further in life because systematically we've just held them down, And I think we have to be listening more to these stories to understand why we literally need to tone it down. Like, we don't need this. There's enough wealth to go around. That's like realistically, like, and we've heard this argument of like, the billionaires don't need that much money. Obviously, to be a billionaire, like you could have $500 million and you could still, for the most part, live the same life that you're living as a billionaire. So literally taking 500 million of your own money and distributing it doesn't change your life that much, but it would change so many more people's, just even like conceptually of like, just have even the slightest bit of empathy to understand what people are going through and make it less about you as a human being and more about like survival of the masses, and like so much can change. Like, do you know how much change $500 million could bring to a community of people? Like, we need to hear people's stories. We need to know what's going on. Like, we need to understand who is suffering and why, take that into consideration, and then use our actions. Like, actions speak louder than words. I mean, that's such a cliche saying, but it's very true. Like, you can be like, I get it. I see you and I hear you. And it's like, okay. And then what? It's like improv, you know? You're like, and, you know, yes, and like, what are you going to do about it if you hear me and see what I'm, you know, like, okay, now let's do something about it. Let's put, you know, whether it's put your money where your mouth is or just take the steps to try and be a part of the solution. Like, it doesn't, you know, us as like the regular folk who, obviously I'm not a millionaire, but like if I can donate here or there, I do, because like I understand like I might not be giving the most, but I'm giving something. And if we all just gave something, it does help. It makes a difference. That's why I think it's important.
Well, you know, that's one of the things that you do with the podcast that I think is really great, is that you make sure to give a platform for so many people who are not able to share their stories or share just their life in general. I just literally shared when I was on the podcast with you about my experience as being an Asian person in a white community and growing up in a conservative town, and how I've had to like redefine my identity because I've been told, you know, we had that whole big conversation, and that's not a story that's not heard on podcasts. But I know like beyond that, you do that for so many other creators and or just people just living their life and talking about, yeah, this is my experience as A, B, and C ethnicity or A, B, and C race, and this is why it matters for you to understand who I am as a person. And I think stuff like that is the bigger conversation, is that we need to give these open moments to show representation, because it's also that commonality of like, they're normal people.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not the stereotype that I thought because my parents taught me that way.
Yeah. Which is like a massive systematic problem of like thinking, because like everyone thinks a certain way because they've been told to think that way for so long. And it just takes one person to be like, I don't think that's real. I mean, it like in most families, it rocks the boat if you have one person being like, I don't know, Dad. I feel like that's like a very narrow-minded way of thinking. And your dad's like, how dare you?
Exactly.
But then like, in a weird way, like just saying that, even if it doesn't turn the person to like understand your viewpoint, just challenging them a little bit is an interesting thing, because they do for a second have to think about it. And just cracking that sort of thinking process for even 1 second is surprisingly doing something. Because like now they've had a moment of like, even if they're in deep denial and don't want to give in, they've had that moment. And you never know. It might potentially in the future change the way they think even slightly, which is like what we have to do. That's the problem. Is like you have to go like bit by bit by bit, because we as Americans are very hard-headed and you know, stuck in our ways. And like that's what we've watched for years, like one little bit by bit by bit that we've kind of broken down the American society. You know, like we got Bernie, a socialist, to run as far as he did, which, you know, 10 years ago, Bernie would be like, a socialist? Get out of here, you know, like you communist. Like we didn't even know what that meant, you know. We were just hoping a Democrat would win. And now we're out here being like, Democrat? Okay, a Democrat? You're basically calling, you know, like a Democrat in our minds is basically a Republican at this point. We're like, okay, nice try. But like now it's just like step by step by step. It's the only way, because, again, as Americans, we're a mess. We simply can't figure it out.
Indeed.
It's true. Well, speaking of all of this and taking actions, doing more than words, one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you, Anna, is that you founded something called Next Up to kind of address a lot of what we're talking about. And we would love if you could explain more about the history of that, what it is, what's going on with it right now.
Yeah, so actually, I kind of came up with the idea of Next Up, which obviously wasn't called that at the time, but at the Orlando podcast movement that we were all at, in the Lazy River, where all great thinking happens. I really can't stress
Unless you're
how
Samantha
much I
and
love a Lazy River. I know, you guys had such a terrible experience, and I had such a great experience in that Lazy River. It was like my dream.
I think it says a lot about our personality.
Yeah,
I think it's
our anxiety, maybe some mental health stuff, overall control issues. It's fine.
Yeah,
It's fine.
I simply cannot get enough of a Lazy River. Anyway, so while at podcast movement, I ran into a friend, Afif Nasuli, who's a journalist, now works at Spotify, Gimlet, Wall Street Journal, producing shows. And he was there at this conference with this sort of Google PRX like diversity program. And at the time, my friend Afif lived in Lebanon. So to me, I was like, whoa, you live in Lebanon and are in this program and are like creating a podcast, and like Google, PRX, this program is paying for it. Like, that's amazing. Like an incredible, I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. The fact that they like fly you out from Lebanon, like that's incredible. And he was working on a show called Her Stage, in Arabic, I believe it's Masrahia, which I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But Her Stage is basically a show about like the sort of femme, sort of, LGBTQIA revolutions like going on in Lebanon, like kind of the underground scene of what it is to be a drag queen or a performer or just living in like a queer space. And I was like, that's a really cool podcast. And that's incredible that this program is paying for you to create that show, because these stories are important. Like, I would have never even known that. Like, that was even conceptually something that was happening until he said it to my face. And I was like, okay, well, wow, like that's incredible. And so that kind of got me thinking that. And if you guys don't remember, Spotify's had a sort of initiative for women to get into podcasting. So that was kind of had already happened. So that was in the back of my mind. And then hearing his story kind of got me thinking. And so really, literally in my mind, I was thinking, but we're iHeart. Why don't we have something like that? Like, we're literally iHeart. We're like constantly neck and neck with NPR as like the top podcast network. Surreal that we would not have something like that. So I cornered our CEO at our iHeart party at Orlando at the podcast movement. And I told him, I pitched him this idea. I was like, I think it's pretty wild that we do not have a sort of diversity initiative here. Like, we are a massive company. We can afford to give back, And he was like, yeah, we could. Yeah. In his Connell way,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay. And so after that, I was like, BRB, Connell, we'll talk soon,
Mm-hmm.
I went away for about a few months and started working on like a pitch. I interviewed a bunch of people, including my friend Afif, who had been in these diversity programs. I talked to a few people from the Spotify program. I talked to a few people from the PRX. And I was just like asking people like, what was your experience? What did you like? What didn't you like? What could have made it better? Just like getting a feel of what people liked about these podcast diversity programs. Because I really had never done anything like this before. So I was just asking anything that came to mind to then go away and create a sort of a program. Like I was just literally being like, okay, so you liked that they gave you money. It was really, I was on such a simple, just trying to figure it out level that I went away, and with the help of Jack O'Brien, my manager on the comedy side, just like kind of using him as like a sounding board, being like, this is what I'm thinking. And then he kind of helped me word it in a way that sounded like professional. Because I am a real, like, in my thinking, I'm a very simple person. I guess that makes me sound strange, but like I like to keep it to the basics. I don't like to get too heady and complicated and like deep. I mean, not like deep. I can get deep, but I mean like I don't like to like use big language to sound smart. You know, like I always think that's like so condescending in a way. It's too much. I'm like, just be real with me, talk clearly. Let's do this so I don't sit there thinking like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking about?
You know? Very literal. Give me the basics, move on.
Exactly. That's how I've always been. I don't believe in like the sounding smart to sound smart. Like, I'm like, we don't need this. Climate change is destroying us. We don't have time. You know, like, we don't have time for this. We got to get moving. Explain to me exactly what you want, you know, and what you're saying. Like, keep it clear. So he kind of helped me like make it sound professional, make it sound good, whatever. And so I took this pitch and, you know, it took a while because this was end of sort of like August 2019 when I pitched it to Connell, and then I went away, and then 2020 came around and I realized it wasn't possible to do this thing where we like flew people out for like 6 months and like worked with them. It was all of a sudden like, oh, there's a global pandemic.
Exactly.
And I basically like put it on the back burner and was like, well, let's get through this first, and then I'll think about this diversity program. Because as of now, things are kind of in a bad place in America or in the world, really.
Yes.
So, and then, you know, it's an unfortunate thing that George Floyd was murdered, you know, in such a really horrible, horrible way. And, you know, this country finally took a Black man again being murdered, but on camera, which is not even the first time that's happened, to have a reckoning. I mean, honestly, it also took like everyone just finally being fed up in this country's inability to even handle a global pandemic, as if it's not happened before, to force everyone to take a look at themselves and, you know, what they were putting forth. And that's what kind of led to me being able to pitch Next Up in a more revised pandemic-friendly way, which is like Zoom, you know, to the company. So I was like, okay, you know, you guys want to do something? Well, here's something. Here's something that we can put forth that will help bring further perspectives into this world. And this is iHeart. So you want to do something? Put your money where your mouth is. You know, like I was like, let's make it happen. And luckily, you know, we're run by Connell, who is very forthcoming and very open and very into it. You know, he's down. And he was like, let's do it. Go do it, basically. I got the thumbs up, but like, have fun. Go do it.
Good luck.
And good luck and good night. No, I'm just joking. But, you know, he was like, go do it. And so I did. I was like, okay. You know, I obviously before that, I had created an entire game plan. I had created a budget. I had created all this stuff that obviously, it wasn't just like, go do it. It was more like, here's everything to present to you. Here's what I would like to do. Here's how much money I need. And then they were like, perfect, let's do it. So yeah, the first inaugural class of Next Up started August 2021, and we finished the program basically February of 2022. We had 8 participants in the program, and all 8 had their shows picked up by iHeart with the help of Toyota, who came in and sponsored the entire Next Up initiative. So we were able to pick up all their shows. And to give an idea, so the initiative is we bring in, originally it was supposed to be only 6 people, but there were certain cuts I just could not make. Yeah. Like I became so emotionally involved, it was like cutting off a limb to cut off certain people from this program, you know?
Yeah.
And so it ended up with 8 people in the program, and we paid for all their equipment. We paid for all their software. And then they went through an intensive 2-week orientation where they basically got like a crash course in all things podcasting, which thanks to everyone at iHeart who contributed to that. And this has all happened over Zoom. After their 2 weeks, they basically started working on their podcasts, which It was a 6-month program. They also got a stipend for their time, so they were paid during this program. And so after 6 months, they had 3 episodes of their podcast completed and a 1-page document or pitch deck, whichever they prefer, created. So with the help of us, me, Joelle Monique, Yesenia Median, and so we helped them put all this together. And they also had mentors throughout this process, other iHeart employees. And then they were able to pitch their show to iHeart, to the development team, shout out Beth Ann, to have their shows picked up. And thanks to Toyota, all their shows were picked up. And they're now currently, I believe, half have dropped and the other half are basically coming out. So all year the shows have been dropping, which has been incredible. Like, we've had so many different podcasts come out of it. You know, we had Anney Twitchell, who has a show about Native American language revitalization. We have Dr. Jonathan Higgins, whose show is called Black Fat Femme, which is all about the intersection of being a Black person with, you know, feminine characteristics and being a fat person in America, which, you know, a lot of people are not interested in these sorts of stories. But guess what? These people exist and we need to hear about their experiences. Maria Diaz is putting out a show, will be out soon, called When You're Invisible, which is all about the people who work behind the scenes to, you know, basically the backbones of this country. And she actually interviewed the people who cleaned up New York after 9/11. Literally the people who had to risk their lives, literally, like, you know, immigrants who went into the streets and had to clean up the debris after our country went through such a tragic experience. You know, it's like, it's not us doing it. We pay the people that we don't pay attention to do all this sort of behind the scenes, anything Americans are like, ew, I don't want to do that. You know, like, just like really horrible, where we're like just monsters and we just pay people to do that. Well, those people have true experiences and they have their own stories to tell. So, you know, Maria went to talk to them. You know, she went to talk to the house cleaners, the cooks, the people who get looked down on in our society, even though they are the people that keep us moving every single day. And so, yeah, we had a lot of great shows like that come out of this program. And it was like all I could have ever wanted. It was such a dream working with all these incredible creators who just didn't have an opportunity to get their foot in the door in podcasting. Because really, podcasting is a very, you know, it might sound easy to get into. You're like, it's just a mic, you talk into it. It's not, you know. Equipment costs money, software costs money, training costs money. Like, we're using stuff like Pro Tools and Audition to edit. It's not easy to just come into these programs and figure it out. It takes time. It takes energy. A lot of people don't have that. And so they can't tell their stories because it's not like a very open industry to anyone. So, yeah, that's kind of what Next Up is. And we're doing the next round of the program starting in January 2023. And if you keep your eye out, there is an application that will be out there.
Right.
Which I will give the link to Anney and Samantha to put in the description. So
is that all they need to do if they are interested in being a part of this program, to find that link?
Yeah. Fill out application. Simple as that. It's also like not a give me a 10-page essay on why you matter. No, one of the big things about this whole process was like, I'm not going to make this a jump through hoops application. This application is going to be a simple, tell me about yourself. Like, I hate the things that really make it be like, you really have to want this. And it's like, you do have to want it, but I'm not going to be the person who demands so much to make you prove to me you're worth my time. No, I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I believe in a very egalitarian, like, I don't care what your background is. I don't care what you've experienced. Like, I don't care if you have a resume. I don't care if you've ever even looked at an audio file before. Right. I just want to know that you're passionate about something and interested in being involved. And I don't need an essay for that.
Yes.
I think a lot of again, like the American sort of like system is like fight to the death. And it's like, that to me is uninteresting. When I see an application that's like 30 pages long, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, all right.
Right.
That's a bit much. You don't need that much for me to know anything about me. Like, I can tell you in a tight paragraph my adversity, what I've gone through, like how I deal with issues, and what I want to do with my life. In a solid paragraph, I could tell you that. And you don't need me to, like, you know, pontificate on my feelings and everything I've, analyzed. Like, it's too much. We need to be able to give people opportunities without making them jump through 100 hoops to do so, Right. And that's how I've always been. I've been like, I've never been interested in like the hoopla. I just want to give people opportunities. That's it.
Right.
Make it a simple process. Because that's what I think, that's what I generally think gets people through.
Right.
I think what holds people back, what gatekeeps people is like when you're like, you couldn't write 40 pages on yourself.
Right.
And it's like what the whole process of college is now, where they're like, write an essay, and you're like, sure. Right. But like, I got into college and I think my essay was like, dude, being a brown person in this country after 9/11, not chill. And I got in. It's like, it should be as simple as like, I don't like how we treat people in this country.
Right.
It's horrible.
I love that. Yeah. No, there is this morbid fascination with getting the most tragic stories as possible that people really want to have and thrive on other people's tragedy to that level that the more tragic it is, the more likely that you're going to be heard. And it becomes problematic in so many ways, obviously, because that's that whole level of white saviorism, like all this level of like, feeling like you have to be at death's door to get heard or seen or to be dead before you're recognized in anything, or even talking about the problems that you face. That's part of that problem. And also feel very seen because when it comes to writing and or trying to make a point, I am that bad storyteller that just says the one line that's important and forgets the detail that I'm like, and that's my story. So thank you, Anna, for seeing me in my bad storytelling.
I mean, there's like that sort of like, I don't need anyone to be college educated. Like, I just need you to be passionate about wanting to tell your story. And that's all I need.
That's all we need. I kind of think you've already answered this question, but just to kind of relay, why do you think initiatives like the one that you've created with Next Up are so important, especially for our industry?
Because I think opportunity for people who are gatekept is very key. Like, to me, I'm like, why are we making it so hard for people to podcast? Like, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's almost like embarrassing how self-important we've made podcasting. Like, it shouldn't be so hard to tell your story. Like, that's why I think it's important. I don't believe that podcasting is this grand sort of, wow, like, like certain podcasts that take themselves so seriously and truly believe they're doing like the Lord's work. I'm like, what is going on here? You're talking into a microphone. Yes, it's well-researched. Anyone can pay for a well-researched podcast. Like, you just have money. It's just relax a little.
Right.
I don't know. I just think that sort of scene within podcasting is too much. And so and of course, that's a personal opinion. And that's just like why I think we just need more voices, more people. I don't think there should be any gatekeeping whatsoever in podcasting. And I understand when you use programs like Pro Tools, like, it's unfortunate that it's such a tough program to break into. And I think I taught myself a lot of how to use Pro Tools. I'm lucky that I had college courses that taught me how to use audio editing programs. Not a lot of people get that opportunity. I'm like very lucky in that I got that opportunity, that my college even offered those courses. So then, like, why would I not take that opportunity to then make it easier for other people to get in? Like, I don't like the idea of taking my privilege and gatekeeping with it. You know, it's like, no, take your privilege and open a door for someone else. And again, it's me opening a door for 8 people. That's a very small step in the grand scheme of things, but that's all it takes. It's like I said earlier, it's just like one small step, one small hand over something. You know, like I give $1 to you. Okay, you know, it's like it's just you have to do the small things that you can do in order to move, you know, things very slightly, which is all we can do. Because again, like I said, as Americans, it's you can't one big push. Everyone's like, whoa, you know, like we can't even get a woman president. Like we're still not even there yet, you know. Like, but just the little things matter, and I think people don't really understand that. They go like, "But it's too small. What difference is it going to make?" But it's like if everyone does something small, it does make a difference. So that's how I feel.
Yeah,
I love it. Before we wrap up, do you have any advice you'd like to give to people who are like starting in podcasts or who have a podcast and want to do more with it?
Yeah. If you have a podcast, just keep working on it. I think people get very discouraged when their show doesn't pop off. It's very hard to pop off a show because podcasting is such an impacted space. I don't think that should stop you because how I think of it, my podcast, Ethnically Ambiguous, it's not a huge podcast. But if it's just like one person feels less alone because of my show, then I feel like I'm like, okay, that's enough for me, you know? I think small steps should be looked at in like a bigger light because it's hard in this world to make something that everyone appreciates. But I think if you make something you appreciate and you think is good, then I think you should keep going at it. I also don't believe making a great podcast should be as hard as people try and make it seem. Just if you are doing something about like a topic, just like read about it, do your research, and you can talk honestly. Luckily, there are so many really good cheap USB mics now. Like you can get a cheap USB mic and record into GarageBand, which is a program that's already on your computer, or you can record into Audacity. Like there's like these different programs that you can get for free that you can record into. And you can get a cheap USB mic for like $25 to $30 to $40. It's not going to be the best mic, but it's something to start with. And you can go from there. And you can also work with different platforms like Libsyn, Anchor FM. Like there's all these like platforms that allow you to pay by the amount of audio, like storage you want to upload, if you will. So it's like, 25 MB to like whatever, 100 gigs, or you can pay by a certain plan to host your podcast. And a lot of these programs, you can apply for their like AdWiz sort of, where they basically help you sell ads on your show. It's not going to be a ton of money, but it's like these little small steps that will help you grow your show. So there's a lot of different things you can do as an independent podcaster to work on your show. And also there's different ways to promote your show, which is like what I used to do back in the day. I would go to like every news, like LA Times, whatever, like all these different sites, and just like look at their editorial boards and see who writes about what you're talking about on your show. Get their email, make a little like press release, which is pretty simple. You can literally Google what press releases look like and mimic them, and then send press releases for your show. Like there's these little steps you can take that, like, look, at first people are going to be like, what? And ignore your email. But if you consistently do it every month, someone will respond like, oh, okay. Like it's these little things that you just have to do if you're doing something independently that are actually very possible, and people just like don't tell you how to do it. And I just had to figure it out myself, and I just would like Google, or, if there's something you want to do on like an editing app, but you don't know how, dude, YouTube. Everyone is telling you how to do everything on YouTube. I learned how to do everything on YouTube. If I have to do something on Photoshop and I'm like, wait, what? How do I do that? I just Google it. Guess what? Some person has been like in depth explaining it for years. And that's like the incredible thing. You can watch anything on YouTube and learn how to do everything. And yeah, I just, those are my little small tips to success in podcasting.
Nice. That's the clip.
They're excellent tips. I feel like Samantha and I are taking notes. This is all for us.
This is mainly for me.
No. Well, Anna, thank you so much for being here. It was a delight. We would love to have you back again. Can you tell the good listeners where they can find you?
Yes. You can follow me on Twitter at Anna Hossnieh, ANNAHOSSNIEH. You could tweet at me if you have any questions about podcasting. I'll respond. If I see it, I'll respond. As long as you're not being mean to me, I usually will respond to you. You can follow me on Instagram at sellinghossnieh, which is SELLINGHOSSNIEH, which again, if you DM me, I will see it. And if you're not being mean to me, I'll most likely respond to you if you have a question or want to talk about something. Or if you're like, how do I get into Next Up? I'll tell you. I'm very much open to helping people get into podcasting or, anything. As long as you're not being mean to me, I'm a very sensitive soul, then I will respond to you. And you can check out my podcast, Ethnically Ambiguous, that I host with Shireen Lani Yunez. We're on iHeart. You can search Ethnically Ambiguous Podcast and we'll pop up. We're on all the platforms. And then, if you follow me on social media, you'll see like all the other shows I promote at all times, and you'll know that I work on them.
Yes.
She does.
Yes, it's quite a few. It's very impressive.
Still trying to figure out how you're sleeping, but okay,
yes.
when you sleep.
I'm not. You guys, I'm not sleeping.
Oh, no. Okay, well. And we will post the link to the Next Up initiative for any listeners who are interested. We very much encourage you to apply. And it's so much amazing stuff you're doing, Anna. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yes. And if you would like to contact us listeners, you can. Our email is StephanieandMomStuff@iHeartMedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at MomStuffPodcast or on Instagram at Stuff I Never Told You. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.